Hello and welcome to Bangladesh. Today I'm Smita Prakash. Bangladesh's Rapid Action Battalion has arrested a man who was circulating Al-Qaeda's Chief Ayman Al-Zawahiri's alleged video messages calling for intifida or uprising against secular forces in the country. This development has sent shockwaves across Bangladesh and, if proved, could have serious implications on the national security of Bangladesh and even neighboring India. To discuss this and more, we have with us senior Indian journalist and security analyst Praveen Swami. Welcome to the show, Praveen.
Thank you.
I'd like to begin by asking, these messages which have supposedly been caught by the Bangladesh Rapid Action Force. Now, tell me, how serious is this threat? And if these messages, if it's proved that they are indeed messages by Zawahiri, what implication will it have on the security the security system in Bangladesh as well as in the subcontinent?
But there's two answers to that. The first part is that if we often think of Al-Qaeda as an organization or as a group that is made up of super terrorists who blow up the Twin Towers and so on. And in that sense, there is no particular threat from Al-Qaeda today. But the larger danger is...
You mean like they're not going to blow up a building in Dhaka, or they're not going to blow up a mosque, or what?
Not directly, but in a slightly more complicated way. It's actually more disturbing. Al-Qaeda is metamorphosed from being a group into an idea. It's become a font of inspiration for a variety of groups across the region. And what we've seen not only in Bangladesh but even in India in recent years is large numbers of self-radicalizing jihadists who take messages from these iconic figures in the global jihadi movement, people like Mr. Al-Zawahiri but also Mullah Omar and others, and then inspire themselves to action.
Okay.
And you've had a large number of small groups springing up in Bangladesh, in India, in Pakistan, fired by this message. Who've gone on to carry out acts of extreme violence. For security services to deal with these sort of new self-radicalizing jihadists, who are often highly educated, smart young people, is of course an enormous challenge, very difficult, and also a sign of disturbing tendencies within our societies.
Do they have sympathizers in Bangladesh?
Al-Qaeda has long had a number of groups sympathetic to its message. Remember that some numbers of Bangladeshis fought with Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan, went back to form what is known as the Harkatul Jihad-e-Islami Bangladesh chapter, carried out many terrorist attacks against Bangladeshis in Bangladesh.
So is Huji an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, or they just have ideological links?
Well, if you look at most terrorist groups in South Asia, I guess they're a bit like all the rest of us South Asians. They're not very organized. People often flow into one group or another. That sometimes makes the dividing lines between these organizations a little blurred. But they've had inspirational leaders.
Like in Pakistan, say one organization would have just a certain area of activity. Like they would only want jihad in Kashmir, they only operate in Punjab, Pakistan, or they operate only in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. What about the radical elements in Bangladesh? Are they like region specific? Are they sect specific? Is it anti-Shia, anti-Sunni, anti-secular? What is it that links these two groups? Is that
if there was one overarching thing which unites all jihadi groups in Bangladesh, it's their common opposition to secularism in the country.
Okay.
If you go back to the moment of Bangladesh's independence, you'll recall that the Jamaat-e-Islami as well as a number of other groups like Al-Shams and Al-Badr that the Pakistan army backed, jihadi groups, had fought against the forces fighting for Bangladesh's independence.
Yes.
And their argument was that religion should be the basis of governance, or the basis of the polity, rather than Bengali identity, Bangladeshi identity. Those tendencies remain widespread in Bangladesh and not limited to the jihadis. The jihadi movement, if you like, is the extreme end of that spectrum.
It has a political
agenda, like all other jihadi groups. After all, jihadi groups
does
fighting
it have a political front?
To some extent, elements in the Jamaat-e-Islami have been sympathetic to these organizations. There's been a history of to and fro.
That gives a legitimacy to these elements,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. We must remember that in any political movement, there will be, whatever left, right, center, there will be some extreme tendencies and some more moderate tendencies. The jihadis, if you like, are the most militant, the most aggressive end of a political spectrum that wants to overthrow secularism in Bangladesh and are prepared to use large-scale violence to do it. In recent years, in both Pakistan and in Bangladesh, to some extent in India as well, you've seen the springing up of new kinds of jihadi formations made up principally of educated young people, often successful young people, who don't like thinking of themselves in quite the organizational slots that maybe their, if you like, parents' generation of jihadi did. And these, in some way, what we've seen with this latest Bangladesh arrest, emerges from this new generation of jihadi who is radicalized not in the battlefields of Afghanistan, but on the internet, but through Facebook and the internet.
But does Bangladesh have the wherewithal to cope, one, and two, the next step, to battle with this new form of jihad, this new intifada calls, this new way of intifada, unlike, you know, what we saw in the Middle East earlier, where it was stone pelting and it was, you know, bombing at cafes and things like that. This is a new kind of intifada that they're talking about. Does Bangladesh have the capacity to fight back this kind of terrorism?
Well, the Bangladeshi security services and the government over the last 4 or 5 years have shown an extraordinary degree of resolve in beating back jihadist and religious fundamentalist groups. And they've done a pretty good job. I think even India's been extremely grateful to Bangladesh over the last 5 years because the kinds of assistance one was earlier seeing terrorist groups within India getting has largely dried up to a very substantial extent. But everywhere in the world, this sort of lone wolf jihadi, as it's sometimes called, or the self-radicalizing jihadi, has proved a tough call to combat. That's mainly because police and intelligence services find it relatively easy to monitor organizations which have a recognized leadership, a recognized group, a funding chain.
For this, you need this international cooperation, right? Does Bangladesh get the requisite cooperation from the Western world, which really needs to look at this mushrooming of you know, the Al-Qaeda groups or the fundamentalism that is growing in Bangladesh?
I think in this respect, policy in the United States and United Kingdom has been a little misguided, because in the name of or with the perhaps good intention of promoting inclusive democracy, there hasn't been a robust enough stand on the value of secularism. And I think Western governments sometimes don't understand the South Asian context and why this value is so important to durable social peace.
And why what you're saying is what secularism is important for national security, and they don't
absolutely,
see that.
Absolutely. It's primarily because in complex multi-ethnic societies like ours, multi-religious societies, where secularism isn't defended, it invariably leads to an escalation of tensions between groups and communities to a point where nations become dysfunctional. Every nation in the region has been through this havoc. Now, the thing now is that even while these political tensions subsist, intelligence cooperation between the West, between India, between Bangladesh is pretty good. And historically, intelligence services have been good on cooperating with each other against common threats, even when at the political level there are problems. The problem with the political stance taken by the West right now is that to some extent it undermines the security resolve of the secular resolve of the Bangladesh political system, and to that extent raises a question mark over whether in the long term politically it will be possible to sustain the often unpopular choices that aggressive counterterrorism operations inevitably involve. At the moment, I think Bangladesh more than capable of dealing with this, both in terms of capacities and in terms of challenges. But we must all be acutely conscious that there are some quite dangerous threats emerging, and it's going to take a lot of effort to make sure they don't blow up into something awful.
Thank you very much for speaking with us, Praveen. That was senior Indian journalist and security analyst Praveen Swami on the challenges that Bangladesh faces today. Before we end, here's a roundup of news and events that happened in Bangladesh this week.
Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has said that those who dismiss and ignore the spirit of the language movement and the 4 pillars of the country's independence are the real enemies of both the Amar Akushe and the country's independence. The Prime Minister gave away the Akushe Padak 2014 awards to 15 eminent personalities at a ceremony held at Osmani Memorial Auditorium in Dhaka. The US Deputy Assistant Secretary for South Asia, Atul Keshav, arrived in Dhaka on February 22nd on a 4-day visit. According to the US Embassy, he would meet national leaders to discuss US-Bangladesh bilateral relations and other regional issues during his stay. Keshav will also meet civil society leaders and private sector representatives to discuss different issues including labour, development and trade. Bangladesh all-rounder Shakib Al Hasan has been banned for 3 matches by the Bangladesh Cricket Board for making an inappropriate gesture on live television during the second ODI against Sri Lanka in Mirpur. He has also been fined 300,000 takas. Earlier, Kumar Sangakkara's 17th ODI 100 had set up Sri Lanka's 61-run win over Bangladesh, helping them take an unassailable 2-0 lead in the series. The Anti-Corruption Commission will seek the wealth statement of Awami League lawmaker Abdur Rahman Badi as the Commission suspects that he amassed wealth through illegal means. The Commission says the probe officer made the report after visiting Badi's constituency and studying income tax report and after thoroughly interrogating him. Hooligans hurled a Molotov cocktail at an armoured police vehicle hardly 150 yards from the Amar Akushe Book Fair in Bogra, which was observing the International Mother Language Day. Police have detained 8 suspects from the premises of the neighbouring Bogra Zilla School. The police, however, have not yet made it clear whether the suspects had any political affiliation.
Thank you for watching. See you again next week.